Good afternoon. I'm very excited to be able to interview this guest today, but they said tell you something briefly about me. I'm the CEO of the Miami Association of Realtors. We're the largest local realtor association in the U.S., second largest in the world. We represent 50,000 real estate professionals here in South Florida, and we have partnerships with 178 foreign associations around the world. So that's enough about me. Phil, tell us about you and Odin Properties.
Sure. I am here from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Odin Properties. We own and manage 6,000 apartments in 9 states, centered around the Philadelphia, New Jersey, Delaware area and the Midwest. Our primary function is to buy apartment buildings, renovate them, reposition them, and normally we continue to own them.
All right, so today is all about technology, and we heard lots of different aspects, largely with new construction. So tell us about how you implement technology and why it's important.
Sure. So technology is something we think a lot about. You did hear a little bit about what's happening in new construction, and we do some kind of renovations of warehouses into apartments, and in those buildings, of course, we're doing smart home technology, thermostats, Internet of Things, smart locks, package delivery systems, all that good stuff. And in our existing assets that we're kind of retrofitting with that technology, the interesting part for us is figuring out how to do that, how fast to do it, on what scale, and then obviously what our kind of return on our investment's going to be. But I think kind of more importantly for us is we are a management organization, which was kind of the reason for the name of the Fireside Chat. We manage all of our own apartments, and just like you had the construction guy up here before, just like him, really important to us is understanding our personnel, how they relate to the resident, how we can deliver the best experience, and then of course how we can make that as efficient as humanly possible. I come from an industry with a lot of people that are very hesitant to change, and I think just crucial to us being kind of the landlord of the future is we have to accept new technologies, we have to embrace it, we got to try to implement it as soon as we possibly can, and at the same time, we have to kind of not go broke doing so.
All right, so not going broke is pretty important.
That's important.
All right, so of the new technologies that you implement, it's more difficult for you than it is with new construction. Which ones are the ones that pay for themselves more and are your most important ones to do? Sure.
So I do think it is market specific, but we are in Miami right now, and you heard again from the previous panel about what's going on in Wynwood, and I think as you can imagine, that's kind of that New York, parts of Brooklyn, that's kind of the cutting edge, right? So these are the things that are going on at the forefront, Portland, San Francisco. These are going on at the forefront of new construction design technology. And as you can imagine, other markets, things move a little bit slower, but what we can see from those markets is that eventually, that technology will penetrate, imagine, all the existing apartments that are out there, in the United States. If you look at the opportunity, right? You look at the existing housing stock versus the new housing stock that's being built. All you hear about is that, we can't build it fast enough, and that's true. Where the opportunities are, in my opinion, are the existing housing stock that's out there, because what you have is residents that are demanding, the new features, but they may be unattainable from a price perspective for that resident. So how do we get the smart thermostats, the Internet of Things devices, the online work order system, how do we get those into the hands of everybody? And that's something that, of course, we're focused on, and that's, I think, a really huge opportunity that's out there. And just really quickly to answer your question, so residents are absolutely demanding an internet interface. So they must have an internet interface when they move into an apartment. They must have somewhere they can go to pay their rent, submit a work order, hopefully to control the HVAC systems in their apartment, maybe to book a parking spot, maybe to book a community room. Again, those amenities that you heard, those are all available for booking. So kind of what's happening is there's that central internet interface, and that again works into all of those amenities that are becoming commonplace at every building that's being built.
So along with all of the new construction in Miami, we have obviously a lot of properties that are more like the ones that you manage, take over, and give us some specifics of what you do to upgrade an existing building and which kinds of things you feel are worth the cost to do.
Sure. So smart thermostats, I think, are absolutely worth the cost. If you have, some of those buildings, you kind of have two types, right? You have a building that are being built today where each individual controls their HVAC unit in their apartment. And then you have buildings where the mechanical systems are central, both the heating and cooling of the apartment and the heating and cooling of the water going up to that apartment. Those are central systems. So I think the first and foremost, in buying a building, what we want to do is eliminate waste that comes from kind of misuse of those systems. So if it's a base building system, we want to install a very sophisticated method of controlling how that heating system works. And if it's an individual HVAC system, we want to make sure that the resident has the ability to control their own cost. Because eventually, although they're responsible for paying for it, if it's too expensive, it's going to be a problem for us. So we got to make sure that those two things are working. And then, of course, yes, we got to implement an interface for paying rent, renewing their lease, submitting a work order, getting a package. At all of these buildings, a lot, in the middle market, in the B and C class buildings, they don't have doormen. So now that everyone's getting everything delivered, especially when these buildings have, maybe one lobby for 300 apartments, you can imagine where that's going to get pretty crowded if you have, delivery guys just kind of dropping packages off here and there. So you got to understand right away a situation for that to kind of embrace the way the world is moving.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's hard.
All right, so you also manage 200,000 square feet of commercial space. So what kind of technology do you employ there?
Sure. So we do have office buildings that we own and manage, very similar to the apartment buildings that we purchased. Those office buildings were really old office buildings that were not Class A buildings, that didn't have sophisticated HVAC controls and sophisticated tenant management. So, what's really great for a person like me, and that's one of the reasons that I'm here, is for us to find a solution that's cost effective, where we can essentially retrofit that building to make it kind of feel a little bit like a Class A building. And that means, again, sophisticated HVAC controls, but also, tenant management. So whether these people, if our tenants, if they want to shrink, if they want to grow, if they want to change their layout, if they want to have sophisticated access for certain people, if they want to have that access off time, if they want to book a community room, it's something we can kind of show up and say, okay, the landlord that owned this before us may have owned it for 50 years and hadn't really embraced that yet. We can embrace that technology and add a lot more value, and it's very cost effective.
All right, so tough question. What types of technology have you tried that didn't work?
So another thing that I talk about a lot is where we have software that has, that has its own interface. That's a problem, right? Because imagine you've got 8 different types of software, then you have 8 different interfaces, 8 different portals you've got to go into. A lot of my staff, that just won't work, right? There's a learning curve problem. There's just a workflow problem, right? They don't want to be going in and out of every different thing. I think a lot of the reason why we've dumped software that we thought was very promising was because it didn't kind of communicate well with our existing system. So we run on our commercial space, we run AppFolio throughout, and our residential, we run Yardi systems. And our kind of litmus test now is if any software, new software that we're looking at doesn't in some way match up with one of those property management and accounting systems, it's really not something that we're going to be very excited about. And the problem is that especially Yardi systems isn't really nice about allowing people to connect to them. So it's been challenging, but I think eventually, those software companies are beginning to work together. They all realize that's the way that the business is going to have to go. So it is moving that way. But I think those have been our biggest pitfalls where, the software doesn't work and we had to dump it. I do think, though, that in terms of, the physical devices that we've purchased, even when those don't work and we have to switch them out, as long as the company stands behind them, it's really not that big of a deal. I think we've had instances, I won't name names, but we've had instances where we bought a lot of devices from a company and, half of them didn't work. And, the company had to come out and switch them out. But I think as an early adopter, those are kind of the prices that you have to pay. And, I think my people understand that, we understand that, our residents understand that. So as long as everyone's kind of on the same page, we're open to things not working great as long as they get fixed quickly and as long as once they're fixed, they do work great and they're compelling. I think residents are kind of ready to deal with some disruption in order to get what they're looking for. So we actually sometimes retrofit apartments when we have people living there, and unlike any other type of work order service where we'd be working in their apartments, if we're doing something to improve their experience, it's something they're going to be willing to kind of put up with a lot of issues, as opposed to, let's say there was a leak in their apartment, we had to fix that, they wouldn't be kind of too happy about that. But if we're putting in new smart technology, they'll deal with it.
It's amazing how that works. All right. Some challenges. How do you handle Airbnb co-living situations? Can technology help?
Yeah. So, I think from landlord's perspective, all up and down the spectrum, from the largest REITs in the country to a guy that owns a duplex. Airbnb is something that is out there. It's not going away, no matter how much, just like Uber, no matter how much the governments try to regulate it. People just will continue to use it, no matter what the penalties are. I mean, in New York, the statutory penalties for using Airbnb are absolutely humongous, right? You can be fined millions of dollars, and people still do it every single day. And I think, that's the pattern in those technologies. So from our standpoint, it's like, all right, how do we deal with it? And it's difficult to know, as you can imagine. It's difficult for us to know if a resident decides to rent their unit out on Airbnb. How do we even know about it, assuming that they're able to coordinate all the access? And it's really not our job to know who's going in and out of the building if they have, if the resident's able to hand off their fob to somebody else. The way that we deal with it is that we kind of just wait until there's an issue. So if there's traffic, a lot of people going in and out of an apartment, we'll send that person a breach of their lease. Or if, we're getting complaints about noise, I think that's our biggest issue with Airbnb is the people tend to rent those apartments out for the night or 2 nights, and for the purpose of having a good time, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the other residents of the building don't love it. So I think the best way for a landlord to deal with it is to really kind of embrace it and try to monitor as closely as they can. And for technology companies out there, I think working with Airbnb is just critical, because it's just, I think it's just really at the tipping point of just becoming even more prevalent throughout the housing stock. I'm now seeing it in markets in the Midwest where you would have never guessed someone would Airbnb being an apartment for the Indianapolis 500 in Indianapolis. All of a sudden, the whole building's full overnight. When it was empty, like the night before, there was no one there. And now all of a sudden, Indianapolis 500 shows up, and there's the parking lot's full. And I would have never guessed that would have happened. But I think it's just critical to embrace that because it's not going anywhere.
All right. So what about any other pain points that you have your company managing as many properties as you do, and can technology help with those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're not software developers. We're not, and I think that's almost true for, I don't want to say everybody in my entire business, but pretty much everybody. In terms of residential landlords, if you're really good at being a residential landlord, you got to really specialize in that. So we're not able to write software to, as the panelist before was talking about, to monitor people where they are, what they're doing. That's a critical piece. The maintenance staff that I have all over the country, while we do send work orders to their phones and they have to close those work orders out once they're complete, and then there's kind of a feedback loop to make sure they did a good job, there's still a ton of waste there, absolute ton of waste. And I think technology is so important at getting that waste down, making people's jobs more efficient. We still get a ton of phone calls, to the office there. Even though people have the ability to put a work order in or submit any type of comment on the app, they still call. And again, what I'd love to see is a software program that kind of answered all those calls and an artificial intelligence engine that could really solve those problems, because it still accounts for a major expense in the budget. And I think there's humongous room there to kind of narrow that expense down, especially in the kind of middle market, because in the buildings in New York City, the brand new buildings, they really have that kind of down to a science. But everywhere else, where you're not seeing, all the markets outside of, call it the top 20 markets, where you're not seeing state-of-the-art new technology and new construction, all of those markets have humongous waste. Millions of apartment units, humongous waste. So that would be terrific to see that get cut down. I also think, going back to my earlier point about utility sensors, I know there are a bunch of companies here that work on smart water meters, smart utility sensors that tie back into an interface that allow us to kind of regulate how much water you're using, how much gas you're using. Those are critical, how much electricity you're using. I think eventually those will be paired with some type of autonomous AI, and that's kind of what we want. That's what we hope we'll get from you guys the next 10 years.
Okay, so my guess is there are a lot of people in this audience who should have been listening very carefully to what Philip Balderson and his company would buy. And these are the kind of minds that can help create something like that. I'm sure you would be available for a consultation on exactly what a program should do. You want to put any other pitch out here for what you'd like somebody to develop?
Sure. So yeah, those are just a couple ideas of things that we'd really like to see. And I think I've seen there are some kernels of that are around. There are some people that are kind of starting with an interface or starting with a sensor, and then kind of like, all right, now what's the next step on that? And I think software. If I can say one thing, or I could send you guys one message today, it's that software is just so critical. Really good software that can answer people's questions. The amount of application for it throughout this country, throughout the world, is just humongous. I mean, anywhere you go, you'll be able, if you've got the right software program, obviously some large company will try to buy it from you. But if you've got the right software company, you've got the right software program or something close to it, I mean, it's just the possibilities are really endless, and the addressable market is humongous.
All right, that's his wish list, and there would be a lot of other people that would be lined up beside him who would want the same kind of solution. So now let's ask you, what kind of technology do you think is going to have the biggest impact in the next 5 to 15 years?
Sure. So again, it all goes back to where our expense line items are and how we can best cut down on those. So I think even on like apartments.com right now, you're seeing kind of the beginnings of virtual tours that are getting more and more realistic. Eventually, imagine you just leasing an apartment, but you never converse or meet face-to-face with a human being, right? You show up, you have a key code to get in, you kind of can look around and see it, and literally you can make an offer right there, or they can make you an offer, and you can execute a lease on your cell phone. I think that is the future of our business. It's really undeniable. I think it's a virtual certainty. The only question is kind of how exactly it's going to work, who the players are going to be, and there's a lot of big companies like Apartments.com, CoStar, that have really kind of staked their claim in those, that have staked their claim in those kind of areas. So I think the biggest change will be as small entrepreneurs and medium-sized entrepreneurs create things that are very valuable to those companies, just like what's happened in the cloud on an enterprise basis, with Microsoft, Salesforce. I think you're going to see kind of the same thing integrate real estate over the next 10 to 15 years, where those big entities will buy up a lot of the smaller things, will create an amazing portal for landlords of all sizes to use, and it will greatly impact our operating expenses, and obviously that creates an opportunity for software sales.
You've been great. Last question. What advice do you have for the investors here in the audience?
I think probably twofold. Number one is, and this may be apart from real estate, but it's more of my business experience, is that we've really been successful working with entrepreneurs, a lot of times based on who those people were individually, how willing they were to pivot when something didn't work right. If you look at a lot of the real estate software companies right now with $500 million plus valuations, they didn't start that way. You know, they didn't start with the software that they have now. They had a major pivot they had to do, and the people in charge and the people, the company culture, the people working for them, they were able to make that pivot. I think that's just absolutely critical because the world's changing fast, and a lot of entrepreneurs I talk to, like they have an idea of what they want to do, and then they're like, oh, we could do this, or we could do this, we could do this. Which should we do? And my answer usually is all of it. See how it works, refine it, take it to people like me when it's a little more developed, and we'll tell you whether or not we could buy it or what we want to see. So for the investors in this room, I think focusing on those individuals is key, and also obviously really understanding how they're going to deliver value to the end customer. So, I've also seen a lot of technologies that are really cool and interfaces that are really cool, but at the end of the day, our return on investment for those wouldn't be significant, so it's not something that we're interested in. I run apartment buildings. I'm interested in reducing expenses and increasing efficiency for that business. If the product or service that you're providing can't materially do that, however cool it might be, it's not something that we're going to spend money on.
Special thanks to Philip Balderson. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.